was 15, I wasn't very good at staying out of trouble. At the time this happened, I was grounded. I was supposed to be home all night, but my mom worked a lot, and I was a bad listener. So my friend Josh asked me if I wanted to go to a haunted house with him, and some of our other friends. I said yes. Josh and Alex came to pick me up and told me that we were meeting Rachel and Kelly at the haunted house. The place we were going to was one of the best from what I'd heard, but it was about an hour away from us. When it was almost our turn to go in, they made us split into 2 groups, because they only allowed a maximum of 3 people to a group. Knowing that Rachel was super jumpy, we sent her in with Josh and Alex, and decided that Kelly and I would go in together first. Before they let us in, they ran over some general rules, emphasizing a few of those rules. They told us multiple times that we would be touched and grabbed, but we were not allowed to touch or grab them back. Then they let us in. Kelly and I were moving super slow, somewhat on purpose, and we didn't even make it through a quarter of the haunted house before Josh, Alex, and Rachel caught up with us, and we began going through it as one big group. As we were going through it, the normal stuff was happening. Getting trapped in certain areas, people jumping out at us, getting our ankles grabbed, people behind fences screaming at us, people above us yelling, the guys with chainsaws running at us, all the typical stuff. But some other stuff was happening that didn't seem normal, but I brushed it off. We ended up deciding to move into a single file line, and I voluntarily was the last in line. There were a couple of times where I would have my arm grabbed, and I would be pulled in a different direction. Each time it happened, I would grab Josh, who was in front of me, and tell him what happened. We both found it odd, because we had been to plenty of haunted houses before, but we still thought maybe it was just part of the attraction. There was one point where we were walking through a pitch black room, and we had to find our way out. During that point, we fell out of the single line formation, and we all went to find the way out. Someone grabbed my hand and began leading me in a different direction. I thought it was Josh, so I willingly followed until I heard Josh say something, and Alex responded. Neither of them were the one that was holding my hand, and I was definitely holding a man's hand. I freaked out. I yelled for Josh, and I yanked my hand out of the man's grip. I found my way to Josh and refused to let go of his hand until we found the hallway, and got to the room where we could see. Kelly and Rachel walked in front of us, and I ended up holding onto Josh and Alex until we got to the end. When I saw the door leading outside, I let go of Josh and Alex, feeling comfortable enough to make it the short distance without clinging to them. This was the wrong choice considering the fact that both of them walked in front of me, leaving me to be the last one to walk out. I didn't even make it to the door before my arm was grabbed and I was yanked back so hard that I fell. I ended up being dragged a couple of feet, but I screamed and yelled for help, and I saw the security guard and my friends rushing back in. Whoever pulled me in let me go. With all the immediate chaos that happened, I had absolutely no idea where the man who grabbed me could have gone. The security guard made sure I safely got out, and then while Josh and Kelly and Rachel attempted to calm me down, Alex explained to the security guard that I had been grabbed in there and pulled away from the group multiple times. He asked us to wait there and stepped away for a couple of minutes before coming back and telling us that he needed to call the police, and told me I had to wait there until they got there. Due to the fact that I was 15, I was dumb. I didn't want my mom to know. I didn't want to deal with the police, and the fact that I wasn't even supposed to be there, I refused. My friends didn't try to force me to stay, and neither did the security guard. I was crying, shaking mess, and I just wanted to go home, so I did. The security guard walked us to our cars. After all of them checked on me again, Alex and Josh took me home. They ended up staying with me a few hours to make sure that I was okay. I never actually found out anything else after that. I don't know if I was the only person that happened to that night. I don't know if it happened to anyone else at the haunted house any other night. I don't know if it was a worker or someone that had paid to go in and simply hid and waited for an opportunity. All I know is that night was enough to make my feelings towards haunted attractions change from something thrilling and exciting to something horrifying and anxiety-inducing. I haven't been to a haunted attraction since that night, and I don't plan on going to one anytime soon. It all started when I was a freshman in high school. As a disclaimer, I was fairly decent at math, meaning I could get a B or a C in the class even when I slacked off. I didn't do much homework, but I did good enough on tests and quizzes that I, at the very least, got a passing grade. My math teacher, Mr. Moore, figured out that I was slacking after about 1 month of school. After that, he made it his own personal mission to try and make me, as he put it, reach my full potential. Nothing too major happened my freshman year, but he did give off bad vibes. If I needed help with classwork, he would always lean in a little too close. If he was handing me something, he'd always make sure that our hands touched. I would catch him staring at me during class or watching me in the hallway. I didn't think too much about it, though I just figured he was a weird guy. My sophomore year, I had Mr. Moore again. He remembered me from the year before, and on the first day he made sure to let me know. He stopped me from leaving after class to tell me how much he missed me. He told me that he had seen my sister around and asked her about me a couple of times, but he said that hearing about me wasn't as good as being able to see me. I told him I had to get to my next class and I tried to leave, but he didn't let me. He roughly grabbed me by my arm and said, "I let you get away with it last year, but I can't let your intelligence go to waste this year. It would also do you good to remember, I don't like to be ignored." Not knowing what else to do, I mumbled a quick apology and pulled my arm away from him. Once I got him to let go, I practically ran to my next class. Things got pretty weird after that. The majority of the time, he would call on me to answer questions, even if other people raised their hands. If I got the answer wrong, he would raise his voice, typically ranting about how I wasn't trying hard enough, and that I was upsetting him. If I told him I didn't know the answer, he would accuse me of lying and disrespecting him and his profession. One time he caught me texting class and had a complete meltdown. He began throwing markers and yardsticks. He knocked papers off his desk. He punched the wall and he began yelling about how he was sick and tired of being disrespected and ignored. After that happened, he moved my seat to the front corner of the room, right next to his desk. He would come to my desk often during class, asking me if I needed help, explaining stuff. I told him I understood. He also became more touchy, always putting his hands on my back, my shoulder, my arm, my hand. Not too long after he started that, he began making me stay after class, and it was always to discuss my grade, which typically sat at a solid B-. I had a grade that was good enough to keep my mother happy, and that was all that mattered to me. When I told Mr. Moore that, he said, "Well, it's not good enough for me, and I'm the one who has control of your grade." I attempted to leave after he said that, but he threatened to fell me if I left, so I sat there while he offered to tutor me after school. I told him I would consider it, and he then walked me to my next class, so that he could explain to my teacher why I was late. He kept his hand on my shoulder the entire time. I started skipping his class after that. I had my friends tell me what the homework was, and my sister helped me learn it all. My friends told me when tests and quizzes were, and I would show up for those, but that was about it. My grade dropped a bit, my mother got mad, and I got in trouble at school because of it. But I was still able to pass the class and I felt safer, so I didn't care. Then my junior year began, and I thought everything would be fine because I didn't have him as a teacher. Then I found out my locker and some of my classes were near his classroom. Nothing happened the first few days of school, and then one day, when I was standing by my locker with a group of friends, Mr. Moore yelled my name down the hallway and began walking towards me. One of my friends, who knew the history with Mr. Moore, grabbed my hand and began pulling me in the other direction. My friend and I wandered the school until the bell rang. Then he walked me to class. After my class, I had to pass Mr. Moore's class to get to my locker. When I was passing him, he grabbed me by my arm and said, "You know, I don't like it when you ignore me. You should really learn some manners." After he said that, he let go and went on as if he hadn't done anything. When I told my friend what happened, he had me move all my stuff to his locker. That was in a different hall, and he walked me to my classes. Everything seemed to be going well after that, until I had to interview Mr. Moore for video announcements. Mr. Grant, the teacher for the video announcements class, asked my partner and I to go interview Mr. Moore to promote an upcoming math-related event. I tried to pawn it off on another group, but nobody wanted it, and I owed Mr. Grant a lot of favors, so I agreed. I told my partner that Mr. Moore made me uncomfortable, and asked her if I could stay behind the camera. She was fine with that. After setting everything up and plugging in my headphones, I told her to say something into the microphone so that I could test the audio. Before she could say anything, Mr. Moore took it from her. He said, "So whatever I say into the mic, you'll hear into your headphones." After I nodded, he smiled and said into the mic, "Then let me whisper sexy sweet nothings into your ears." I ripped the headphones off, apologizing to my partner, and left. When I got back to Mr. Grant's class, it was obvious to him that something was wrong. He took me into the editing room and I told him everything. He tried to get me to go to the principal, but I refused. I begged him not to tell anyone, and after enough pleading, he agreed as long as I promised to tell him if anything else happened, and if I allowed him to talk to Mr. Moore. After that incident, Mr. Grant talked to Mr. Moore and nothing happened for almost a month. Then Mr. Moore caught me in the hallway during class. It was his free period and I was on my way to get my notebook that I accidentally left in my last class. When I passed the room for the first time, he said my name, and I ignored him, acting as if I didn't hear him. The second time I walked past, when I was heading back to class, he grabbed me, pulled me into his classroom and shut the door. He pinned me up against the wall and said, "I don't understand why you're spreading lies and trying to ruin my life, when I've only tried to help you." I tried to calm him down and explain that I didn't go to the principal, so he shouldn't be mad. But that just made him even angrier. He asked, "What is it? Do you get off on making me mad and getting me in trouble?" I told him that I wouldn't tell anyone else if he just let me go. He then asked if I was serious and began to slide his hands down my side. I panicked and threatened to scream if he didn't let me go. Between my threats, my crying, and my hyperventilating, it was enough for him to let me go. I ran out of the classroom and hid in the bathroom until I calmed down. After that, I went and got my stuff and then hid out in Mr. Grant's room for the rest of the day. Nothing else happened after that, and I didn't tell anybody. Mr. Grant knew that something happened, but he didn't force me to talk about it. I assumed he was the main reason that Mr. Moore left me alone after that. I'm a 21-year-old female with a young dog. My dog is pretty hyper, so I do what I can to make sure he gets a walk every day, so that it's easier to get him to settle down at night. My dog is also extremely anxious, and when strangers get too close, he panics. For some context, I live on a road that only has about 12 houses, so in order to take my dog for a long enough walk, I'll walk down the road I live on, cross a main road that's busy, and doesn't have a traffic light or crosswalk. Then I go into a decent-sized neighborhood. Another thing I should probably mention is that I'm not exactly the most prepared person. I don't carry around anything to defend myself. This particular day, I only had my phone, my AirPods, and my dog, and I was wearing my Nike slides. I didn't even bring my keys with me. Now moving on to what happened. I was walking down the road my house was on, approaching the main road, and I was on my phone with one of my friends. I had my AirPods in and we were talking about something that neither of us knew too much about. So at one point he decided to Google some stuff, and when he was looking up we both went silent. When we stopped talking I heard someone behind me saying, "Hey, come here puppy," repeatedly. At first I didn't care too much. My dog was in front of me and I wasn't paying attention to him. It didn't sound like the man was too close behind me. Plus, it's pretty common for people to try and get a dog's attention. Despite the fact that I wasn't concerned, I still wanted to be cautious, just in case. I whispered for my friend to be quiet for a minute. I turned my head, making it look like I was looking for cars, and seeing that the guy was a bit closer than I thought. He was, and I moved to the other side of the road. I quietly told him I would call him later. I put my AirPods away and put them in my pocket, focusing more on getting away from the man behind me. The guy behind me didn't cross the road, so I decided to walk through an empty plot of land and put more distance between us, while also still heading towards the main road. As soon as I stepped off the road and onto the grass, the guy crossed the road. At this point, my dog began sniffing around and refusing to move when I tried to pull him, which meant he had to go to the bathroom. It was terrible timing, but I didn't want to drag him, so I stopped and allowed him to sniff around and find a spot. At this point, I was far enough away from the guy that I felt comfortable enough standing there as long as the man stayed on the road. The guy stopped when he was parallel to us and squatted at the curb. He said, "Come here, puppy," a couple of times while holding his hands up before saying, "Hey girl, your dog's cute. What's its name?" Not wanting to give him my dog's name and make it easier for him to get my dog's attention, I simply said, "Yeah, thanks," and kept an eye on him while waiting for my dog to finish doing his business. The man stood up, stepped on the grass, and said, "I asked you a question. What's your dog's name?" I ignored him and began to pull my dog towards the main road, which was, to my absolute horror, relatively busy. There wasn't enough space between cars for me and my dog to safely cross the road, so I had to wait. The man took a couple more steps forward, and it began to make both me and my dog nervous. I had my dog sit down, and when the man said, "Whoa, he's a good listener. Let me pet him." When I refused to let him pet my dog, he came closer. My dog began to become visibly scared. He started to whine and pull away from me. The man began to walk faster towards me, yelling about how I was stressing my dog out and upsetting my dog. He told me that I was a terrible owner, and that I wasn't able to properly take care of my dog. I tried backing away from him, but I was slower because my dog wasn't trying to go in the same direction as me. The man reached out and tried to take the leash out of my hands, while telling me I was scaring my dog. He did manage to get the leash from me, and without really thinking, I grabbed my dog and took his collar off. Then I ran across the street carrying my squirming 30-pound dog, losing both my shoes and almost getting hit by 2 cars in the process. I did somehow manage to make it across the street and get to the neighborhood. I saw an older lady outside sitting on her porch. She let me and my dog calm down in her fenced-in backyard, while I called one of my cousin's friends who live close by to pick us up. When he was driving us back, I managed to get both my shoes back, and the man dropped my dog's leash and collar on the sidewalk, so I got that back too. I haven't seen the man who tried to steal my dog since that day, and I really hope I never see him again. I was about 20 at the time, going to college, living on campus, and just trying to make it through my classes. I had to go to an 8 a.m. class. It was raining, and I didn't have my umbrella, so I did the only thing that I could in that moment. I put on a hoodie and began to walk to class. I hadn't made it too far when a guy ran up to me and offered to share his umbrella and walk me to class. His class was in a different building, so when class was out, I had to walk back in the rain with no umbrella. It wasn't too big of a deal. I wasn't worried about it. But as I was on my way out of the building, I heard someone say my name. It was a guy I didn't recognize. So I asked him if we knew each other, and he said, "I know you." I was confused, so I asked him how he knew me. He said, "I know everything about you." He then proceeded to tell me where I lived, my hometown, my phone number, where I worked, what car I drove. He knew it all. I told him I would rather walk alone. He asked me why I wouldn't let him walk me to my apartment, when I had let someone he had never seen me with before walk me to class. I told him that I would let him walk with me to the police department, if he was so desperate to walk with me somewhere. He called me a bitch and walked away. I was majorly freaked out, but I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't though, because 2 days after the incident, I noticed that he seemed to be everywhere. Whenever I went to class, he was outside the classroom. When I went to work, he was in the parking lot. Some nights I would see him sitting outside of my apartment building. I contacted the police, but they told me they couldn't do anything about it, since he's technically done nothing wrong. I was told that if it escalated, to speak to them again. But until he did, there was nothing that could be done. He followed me around for months after that, but he never tried to speak to me again. I tried to speak to him once, and as soon as he noticed I was heading directly towards him, he took off. I was so freaked out that I ended up leaving for break a week early. While I was gone, my roommate called to tell me that she came home to find some guy in our apartment, going through my stuff in my bedroom. Based off of the description of him, it was the same guy that had been following me. She called the police and they weren't much help. I ended up going back that same night to make sure nothing of mine was missing, and nothing was. After break was over and school started up again, I was hoping that he had moved on, and that I can get through the rest of my semester without trouble. But the day after I got back, a note was slid under my door. It said, "I miss seeing you and watching you. You can never leave me again." I tried the police, but again they did nothing. For the rest of the semester I tried to ignore it, and I did good. Besides seeing him around, nothing else happened, until I was about to head to my family for Christmas. There was a small present sitting outside my apartment. Inside were pictures of me in class, me walking, me at work, me getting in and out of my car, me in my apartment. I freaked out. I threw the pictures away and packed what I could fit in my car, and I left. I had my brother get the rest of my stuff for me, and I took a lot of precautions when it came to moving to a new place. I changed my phone number and went so far to get a new car. I did everything I could get away from him, and it must have worked because I haven't heard from him since, and I hope I never hear from him again. This happened to me 6 years ago, and it will haunt me for the rest of my life. I grew up in one of the most densely populated neighborhoods in all of North America. The neighborhood wasn't initially supposed to house 12,000 people, but by the time I was 12 years old, it had populated around 30,000 people. It was one of Toronto's poorest neighborhoods, with the 50% of the population being under the poverty line, though the crime rate was not nearly as high as you'd expect it to be. The neighborhood was mostly made up of immigrants and refugees looking to find a better life, my family included. It was summer break between 5th and 6th grade, and my cousins, who happened to live in the same apartment complex, were at our place watching movies. I was getting hungry, so I grabbed some money and headed for the convenience store to get snacks. It was around 7 p.m., so the sun was still up, and there was an hour and a half left of the light. The convenience store was half a block away, so I walked in. When I got to the parking lot of the residential building the store was in, I noticed a man wearing a black hoodie, with horizontal green stripes, standing in the corner of the parking lot. There was nothing too noticeable about the man, except that he was smoking directly under a no smoking sign. Nothing uncommon in that neighborhood, just kind of ironic. I walk up the steps into the cramped convenience store. There might have been 7 people in there, but it looked as if it was already almost full. Probably as big as a mid-sized apartment, so was already stocked up to the ceiling. Point is, if anyone enters, everyone in the store knows. So I come in, and directly to the left of the entrance is a shelf packed with many different varieties of candy. I was like any other child who has 20 different varieties of candy laid out in front of them, but only has the budget for 2. Lost in thought. At the moment, I forgot about the man who was smoking. He enters through the door. He walks into the nook of the store behind me, where they keep all of the flatbread. I can feel his gaze in the back of my head. I quickly decide on the snacks and pay and leave. I walk out, down the steps into the sidewalk on the other side of the narrow parking lot, when I hear the chimes of the exit door. I glance behind me to see who is exiting the store, and I'm a shade under petrified when I see it's a man exit the store, especially when I notice he's carrying nothing in his hands. I quickened my pace just a tad and reasoned with myself that he just bought a pack of cigarettes and just put it in his pockets. That idea has barely crossed my mind. By the time I am halfway back to my building, I turn around to see if he's still there. He is maybe 15 feet away from me when we make eye contact. He has his hood off, and I can see his face clearly. He looks to be Afghan. There were a lot of those since the neighborhood was a hotspot for refugees, and at the time Afghanistan was doing really badly. He has scars all over his face, and he's balding on top. He couldn't have been too tall because he wasn't much taller than the 6th grade me, so like 5'4" or 5'6". I spin back around and start to speed up, and I hear footsteps behind me quicken. By the time we get to the D-shaped driveway to my building, we are speed walking. Remember, it's broad day, and there are plenty of people around, and a man chasing a kid around is weird to anybody. As soon as we hit the split in the sidewalk which separates the driveway and the straight path, I start sprinting at full speed to my building. Luckily, there was someone buzzing in at that exact moment, and I slipped in the door behind him. I quickly whirl around and pull a pneumatic glass door shut. When I look up, I see the man, seconds too late, on the other side of the glass. The look on his face still scares me. He stared at me with an expression of anger I had never seen before, nor have seen since. I run to the elevators and push the button. He starts rattling the door. The expression on his face was still sinister. When the elevator comes, he understands that he won't catch me, and he leaves the way he came. Hi. First of all, I just want to say English is my second language, so please forgive me if there's any grammatical or spelling errors in the story I'm about to tell you. As a backstory, I'm from Malaysia, and this story happened in one of the international airports there. I came from the East Malaysia, and I was a student in one of the local universities in Peninsular Malaysia. You can't travel to Peninsular Malaysia by land because the Peninsular and East Malaysia is separated by the South Chinese Sea. So of course the fastest way to get to the Peninsular is by flight. And for some reason, I really like taking the last flight of the night to get to my destination. I usually traveled alone and mostly kept to myself, as I'm an introvert and don't really like talking to strangers. Before that night, I haven't really encountered any problems with weird people, as the airports tend to be busy, and I always stayed in an area filled with other people minding their own business in a flight. I would just read or listen to some music. I also tended to just ignore the person sitting next to me. One night my flight was unfortunately delayed. We were supposed to reach our destination close to midnight, but with the delay, we would reach the airport close to 2 a.m. I remembered being frustrated because I know it will be hard to get an Uber that late. I sighed, and then just decided that I would spend the night at the airport and grab an Uber the next morning to my university. No big deal, I thought. People do this all the time, I thought, so I relaxed into my seat. I forgot to mention that during the flight I was supposed to sit in the middle, but when everyone was seated, I noticed that the aisle seat was empty. I moved there, and this is when I noticed the guy sitting on the window seat was acting strange. He kept looking at me and was trying to get my attention, but I ignored him with all my might, because I was just tired, and don't really want to have a conversation with a stranger. I just closed my eyes and pretended to sleep. I remember it was really cold inside, and I was thinking about just turning off the AC on top of my seat, but I didn't really want to move because then the guy would know I was awake, and I would be forced to engage in a conversation with him. It was a 2.5-hour flight after all, and I don't want to have a conversation during the flight. Then suddenly I feel a whole lot colder than before, and opened my eyes just a little to figure out what was going on. Then I saw the guy actually adjusting both the AC from the top of his seat, and also the AC from the middle seat to face me. I got very annoyed, but I'm not actually someone who likes to confront people for anything, so I just sucked it up and closed my eyes. even though I was now shivering and just sort of hugging myself and continuing to annoy this guy. I honestly don't know what the guy was thinking doing that to me. I thought he was done doing whatever he was doing and wouldn't bother me anymore. After that, right? After all, I didn't respond to whatever the heck he was doing, even though I'm still suffering in silence now from the cold. However, when the air hostess started to distribute the pre-made meals to the passengers, and he noticed that I didn't have a meal when he got his, he suddenly tapped my shoulder, and I just tensed up and looked at him in alarm, because I don't really like being touched by people due to some childhood trauma. But this guy didn't seem to notice my reaction to him, and just smiled at me. "Hey, I noticed that you don't have a meal. Are you hungry? You know what? You can have my meal," he said. And I was just looking at him before saying, "No, it's okay." And I smiled, uncomfortably, but he insisted. He even got me to lower my table and forced me to accept his meal. Then he ordered another meal for himself and started telling me that he can't eat alone after seeing me. He said he felt sorry for me and that it was in his nature to help people. And then he just watched me eat the entire meal with a big grin on his face. He didn't even touch his meal until after I was done. Now, if the meal wasn't prepared by the airline and it was still sealed, I would definitely think he put something in the meal. But then I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe he really was just trying to be helpful, even though I felt extremely uncomfortable and he was being a little forceful. He even moved to the middle seat to be closer to me. He then asked me what my name was and told me his name was Sam and that he worked somewhere in Peninsular. I just nodded, and then he asked me where I was from and why I was going to Peninsular. I gave him a short but honest answer just to be polite. When I told him I was a student at one of the local universities there, he then asked me how I was going to get to my university at this hour. I stupidly said, "Oh, I'm just going to spend the night at the airport. I'm used to it." "What? No, that's dangerous for a girl as pretty as you," he said before continuing. "You know what? My brother has a place not far from the airport. Why don't you stay with me?" "Oh, don't worry, my sister-in-law is there. You won't be alone. Don't worry, I'm a good person," he said, still with that big grin on his face. I immediately became afraid and quickly said no while shaking my head. "There will be a lot of people at the airport, I'm used to it," I said, but he ignored me and began to chatter happily, not caring whether I answered him or not. At one point, he even asked me if I was single and asked for my phone number, and I just gave it to him but was planning to block his number if he ever tried to contact me or something. He even made a few comments about my looks and how he found me cute, that I looked so lost, so that he just had to say something to me. At this point, I began thinking about my options. For some reason, I didn't think about approaching one of the air hostesses for help because technically, he hadn't done anything wrong to me. But I felt scared anyhow. I decided that I would get out as fast as I can, as soon as we landed, and ditch this guy, just to be safe. I don't know, maybe I was just being an idiot, but I had several encounters with creepy people before. That it was so bad that my few friends and cousins called me the weirdo magnet due to my naiveness. So no, I'm not taking any chances. After all, I was a first-year student and had just started university, and I didn't have anyone that I could really call my friends yet. So yeah, I'm on my own. So back to the story. The plane landed and I tried to get out as fast as I can, but I have a hand-carry luggage, and it was slowing me down. Sam was standing behind me the whole time, and once we got on the ground, he actually held my hand, as if it was the most natural thing to do. I froze. I was really scared and honestly didn't know what to do. I absolutely hated it when people touched me. My family never hugged me, and my very few friends knew that I hate being touched unless I tell them it's okay to touch me. And this stranger just holds my hand without saying anything. I know I should be doing something, maybe scream for help, but I just stood there and froze like an idiot that I am. I just followed this stranger. Then we walked past the toilet and I suddenly got an idea. I told Sam I needed to go to the toilet. At first he said no time because his brother's here, and we need to hurry up. But I insisted on going and said I really need to pee. And I wasn't lying either. So he sighed and said, okay. I got hopeful. Maybe I can escape from this guy. So I started to drag my stupid luggage to the toilet. But this guy stopped me and told me he can take care of my luggage for me. I said no thanks, but he just grabbed my luggage from my hand and told me to hurry up. So I walked to the toilet and stayed there for a bit, panicking. I thought about ditching my luggage and tried to escape without it, but then I remembered that my laptop was inside that luggage, and it had all the important documents that I needed for my study. I tried to call somebody, but as my phone was dead, I started to tear up a bit and decided to just ditch my stupid luggage and run away somehow. But I must have taken too much time in the toilet, because then I heard someone enter the toilet and call me by my name. Yeah, it was Sam. My heart dropped. I slowly got out of the toilet, fully convinced that this was it for me. I'm doomed. Now you would think that I could ask for someone's help or just approach one of the staff for help. I know I should, but as soon as he touched me, my skin crawled and I just got really scared again. And since it was already very late, and we were really the last flight to arrive that night, there were very few staff around, and those that were working were engaged in something else or were surrounded by other passengers, probably asking for help about accommodations for the night or something. I just watched them helplessly, hoping someone might notice my distress, but everyone just ignored me. While walking towards his brother's car, he told me to tell his brother that I'm his girlfriend, and to just stay quiet and he'll do all the talking. Then I thought maybe I could ask his brother for help, and just send me to university instead of going wherever this guy is planning to take me. But then I started thinking that what if his brother doesn't believe me? I mean, between family and a stranger, who would you believe, right? Plus, maybe I am being stupid, and Sam was really helping me, even though he was forceful and wouldn't let me go. Maybe he was just overly nice. Seeing no other choice, I sadly got into the car with them. No, I'm not good with cars, but I remember the car I got into with these strangers. It's a black double cabin Hilux, but I didn't see the plate number. So we drove for about an hour, and all the time I was scared, and this guy wouldn't let go of my hand. I noticed the brother kept looking at me through the mirror, and I was even more scared and uncomfortable. Then they brought me to this condo. I was really hoping that there really was a sister-in-law, and that all of this was a huge stupid misunderstanding. But then his brother told me that his wife is not home, and that she was visiting some family member, and will only be back tomorrow. I don't know what to think about anymore, so Sam told me that I can stay in his room, and tomorrow morning he'd take me back to my university. I didn't really want to go to his room, but I didn't really want to stay in the living room with two men that I don't know. He showed me his room and then handed me my luggage back, and I just locked the door. So I'm just sitting in the bed looking at the door. My heart was pounding like mad. For a while, nothing happened. Then I heard a knock on the door. I tried to be quiet because maybe whoever it was will leave me alone, thinking I had gone to sleep. "It's Sam. Are you awake?" he said in a quiet voice. "I just need to talk to you for a bit." When I didn't say anything, I heard the doorknob was being turned, but I locked it so he can't get in. Then it was quiet again for a bit, until I heard the jingle of a key and my heart dropped, when I realized he had a key and was trying to get inside. I hurriedly told him to wait, and I opened the door. Just a bit. Sam was there smiling at me again. "Oh, I thought you were sleeping. Why did you lock the door?" he asked. "What do you want?" I'm tired. I just really want to rest," I told him, and tried to shut the door, but he pushed the door and prevented me from shutting the door properly. "Sam, please just leave me alone for now. I'm really tired," I told him, but he wouldn't budge. "Hey, what's wrong? I'm really a good person. You have nothing to fear from me. You can trust me," he said. At this point, I got another idea. "Oh yeah, prove it. Give me your IC, Malaysian identification card," I said, and to my surprise he said okay, and he really did give me his IC. See, I'm not lying to you, he told me. So yeah, I got his card and saw his name really was Sam, but that doesn't mean anything. The card seems legit, but he's still a stranger to me. Long story short, he got inside the room and locked the door behind him, so it was just me and him. Trapped me inside the room, and he tried to have a conversation with me, and tried to get me to sit down with him on the bed. But as soon as he tried to get close to me, I just stood up and tried to get to the door, at which point he proceeded to grab my hand and try to get me away from him. I finally screamed and told him to go away. I don't remember much about what happened next, but the next thing I knew, I heard his brother's voice calling for us and asking what happened, and he was banging on the door. Now I was crying hysterically and struggling to open the door while Sam just sat on the bed looking at me, seemingly stunned as if he didn't do anything wrong. I finally managed to get the door open, and at this point I was sobbing and told his brother I wanted to leave now, and that I didn't want to be there anymore. Somehow I convinced his brother to just drive me to my university. Of course the gate was locked, and the security guard there told me that I had to walk to my dorm because he can't let any car inside after midnight, and I just said that it was fine and walked the rest of the way. But I didn't care, and didn't want his brother to find out where I stayed for fear that they might come back and search for me. I was exhausted, and I remember telling my friends back home about what had happened the next day, after getting some much needed rest, and they dismissed it, saying that I was being dramatic, and that it was actually romantic. Yeah, they actually think it was romantic, and I missed a good opportunity to find a boyfriend. And I was like, what the heck? Which part was romantic? The part where he practically dragged me to come with him even though I repeatedly said no? Or the part where he locked me in his room with him? What the actual F? Oh, and I still had his IC, but kind of forgot I had it with me until I arrived at my room, and just kind of lost it and cried silently and realized I was still holding on to his damn identification card, and cried harder, waking up my roommates. I didn't know them that much, but they kind of helped me, and I told them bits and pieces of what had happened to me, but honestly I just wanted to sleep and forget anything ever happened. For a week I lived in terror, and I refused to go out of my dorm in fear that Sam and his brother might come back. Sam did text me, and called me a few times asking for his identification card, and asked me to hang out with him and his brother again, as if nothing happened and everything was fucking fine. And then he told me he went to my university looking for me, and I freaked out. I asked my roommates to drop his card with the security guard, and told Sam to just pick it up there, but he never came. I blocked his number after that. I ended up dropping out of my university a few weeks later, but for a different reason, unrelated to this story, and moved back with my family in East Malaysia. Now, I don't know if I'm actually being overly dramatic about what had happened that night. I don't really care if anyone believed me, but it felt good to finally let this off my chest. And I don't really know what would have happened that night if I didn't scream and convince his brother to send me back to my university. But Sam, the supposedly good guy, let's never meet again, ever. Workaway is an organization that enables people to volunteer aboard to help others in need of exchange for food and shelter. Most often than not, people on Workaway decide to help others abroad to travel to exotic places, and people that hire Workaway volunteers are often families, couples, or elderly people that are too busy for basic chores and therefore decide to shelter Workaway volunteers to take care of these basic chores. This means that complete strangers, aka the Workaway volunteer, and the host or hosts will be living together for an extended period of time. This is where things can go south. For context, I'm 18, and this happened to me just a couple of months ago. It was my first time doing Workaway, and after the 2 days trying it out, I'm 100% sure that I won't do it again. It was one of the most traumatizing events in my life. and I'll remember it till the day I die. Also, I'm a female, and for context's sake, I've always received compliments about my body ever since I hit puberty, so I'd say I'm definitely on the attractive side. Not to say it's always been rainbows and sunshines for me on an emotional level. One day while browsing on Workaway, I received a direct message from an offer of an elderly couple that needed help with gardening chores. The account that messaged me had its first name set as Enzo, so I assumed it was the husband that was hiring the Workaway volunteers. Upon inspecting the profile picture though, I realized it was a selfie of him with a much younger woman, maybe in her early 20s. She wasn't even smiling, and it didn't even look like she was acknowledging that she was in the guy's selfie. I didn't think too much of it and read the description. Couple looking for some gardening help. Very beautiful view on the ocean. Looking for young and strong workaways to help. Don't forget that swimsuit. The smiley face made it a little creepy, but I probably thought the guy was old and just trying to be funny. They had pictures of the house that seemed like a charming one, with a pool and a nice view on the beach. It looked like paradise, and it had a pretty good rating, so I accepted. All of it was in the south of Italy, and looked to be overly a really nice place to stay. All in all, I was pretty excited. Fast forward and I arrive at the place. It's kind of like in the pictures, except that the garden totally run down, as if someone had destroyed it. I get introduced to Enzo first. He's poorly dressed, and I immediately notice he's a little socially awkward, but I think that's just because he can barely express himself in English. I ask him where his wife is, to which he responds that she died about a week ago because of cancer. On the spot, I'm immediately heartbroken and give him my condolences, though I'm a little skeptic, because you don't just die of cancer in your 20s. Maybe they broke up and he just didn't want to admit it. He was definitely lying about something. As I'm saying I'm sorry for his loss, he looks down as if he were crying. So I'm awkwardly, not really out of sympathy, decide to give him a hug. While we're hugging though, I notice his hands are a little low down my back, barely touching my butt. I was wearing a sundress, so I really felt it, but I didn't think too much of it and brushed it off because he was old and rather short. But this was the first red flag for me. We go inside and he starts showing me around the house. He kept telling me that there's a pool in the garden if I want to swim. He tells me this about 3 times and it's getting on my nerves. He shows me my room, and it's a big room with a view on the backyard pool and the beach. He had showed me his room, which had the same view. Once in my room though, he also mentions that there's mice in the attic above my room that sometimes make noise at night. I tell him, "Oh really?" And he doesn't answer. Awkwardly look out the window, and after a long awkward pause from me, looking outside the window and turning back to him to compliment the view, he leaves my room without saying anything. I thought maybe he didn't hear me. Fast forward to the next day, and I'm working in the garden, cutting bushes and watering the plants, while he's out on the porch behind me laying down and taking a nap. Or so I thought. It was pretty hot that day, so I was wearing a bikini and a baggy old shirt on top. While I'm bending over to water some smaller plants in the back, I can't help but notice his eyes are open, looking right at me. I'm not sure he's watching me though, so I decide to go water the plants next to him and pretend I think he's sleeping. I bend over and pretend I'm picking up something from the soil. I'm aware that my breasts are more or less half exposed through the baggy shirt I was wearing. I quickly glance in his direction and see that his old eyes are wide open and locked onto my breast. A little disgusting, and I stand up and walk towards the side of the house where he can't see me. A couple moments after that, he goes back inside. I start to get a little suspicious about this guy, but I couldn't really blame him. After all, his wife was allegedly dead, or broken up, and it wasn't the first time a guy has looked at me like that. I take this as a second red flag though. On the second day, Enzo had given me permission to take the day off, so I decided to wander off on the beach. It was fun and especially beautiful. but it was a little too sunny, so I decided to go back in the backyard near the pool and under the shade of the trees. When I came back, Enzo was walking towards me with swimming goggles in hand. He suddenly tells me there's a small rock in the pool that I should pick up because he's too old to go that deep in the water. That's when I thought he was a little odd. Firstly, who has small rocks not so randomly scattered in their pool floor? And second, who owns a pool and doesn't have a perch to get small leaves and insects out of the water? But put on the spot, I decided to do the job. I was also already in my swimsuit, so why should I not do it? I put on the goggles, go inside the water and pick up the rocks. While I'm doing this, he's standing there just watching me do it. In the water, I faintly hear the phone's recording sound. And while going back up out of the water after picking up the last rock though, I noticed him on his phone for the first time. He was holding it in the water, with both of his hands as if he was zooming in on me. It was just too obvious. I tell him I'm done and ask him if that's his phone. He replies that he's using it to zoom into the water because it's waterproof, and he can use it to see the rocks in the water. I told him it was a great idea, though I didn't believe him in one bit. This was the third red flag, and right then and there, I make up my mind to leave early because I don't feel safe with this guy. I ask him for a towel since I forgot one, and he quickly jerks away to get one in the house. While I look at the sea in front of me, I wait for a good 5 minutes before he hands me a towel. That's when I suspected that he most likely was watching me from upstairs window before actually getting a towel. I dry myself off and get to my room to take a nap because I was exhausted. Once I was in my room though, I looked for possible hidden cameras because I started to doubt Enzo. Fortunately, I found nothing, so I locked my door and took a shower and went to sleep. I woke up at around 7 for some reason. I can't find Enzo anywhere in the house. It's dinner time, so I just decided to start cooking. I call him out for dinner and he finally shows up. I ask him where he was, to which he responded that he was in his room. Again, this was a complete lie, since I walked past his empty room several occasions, which he had dinner and kept telling me how good it was. I kept telling him with everything that's left in me that I was flattered, to which he responded back with an empty, old creepy smile. That night, I had some trouble falling asleep. I had obviously locked my door and thus felt safe, but it was an unusually hot summer night. Before coming home, I had this habit of sleeping naked that I stopped doing once I came here for obvious reasons. I opened the windows to get some fresh air, but still didn't help. So I subsided to old habits and decided to take off my pajamas to sleep naked. I instantly fell asleep after that. I woke up at around 3 AM to some noise coming from the ceiling. It was like a faint old wood cracking. I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling above me. That's when in the dark, between the planks, I faintly see a set of eyes looking at me. I lock eye contact with Enzo, who's in the freaking attic, and get in a full panic mode, but I'm paralyzed with fear, so I don't move. I pretend I'm looking at the left side of the ceiling and then close my eyes. My breasts are completely exposed to this creep, so I decided to turn to my side and move the blanket up to cover up. For the rest of the night, I'm too scared to open my eyes or move, so I just stayed there paralyzed in fear until some sunlight reaches me. Morning came and I was more than ready to just get the hell out of the house. When it was about 6 in the morning, I packed my stuff and left the house running. I waited at the train station to get to the nearest airport. Thank God I came out unharmed. The guy was twisted and seriously freaking perverted. So to Enzo, you lying old creep, let's never meet again.
This happened to me in my early 30s back in 2016. I was staying at my grandparents' cabin for vacation up in a very secluded area of Wisconsin during the winter. It wasn't anything too special, just a one-story cabin with a 2-bedroom and 2-bathroom type thing. The appropriate sized cabin for a couple, you could say. One evening, I was on the couch watching a movie on the flat screen TV when I heard a loud knock at the door. I then thought to myself, who could be knocking on the door this late into the day? Keep in mind, I was basically in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forests, so it was odd to have someone knock on your door. I opened the door, expecting to see someone, but I didn't see anyone. Assuming it was probably ding-dong ditchers, I went back on the couch to finish the movie I was watching, when a second knock came. This time, much louder than the first knock. I sighed and got up and asked, "Who's out there?" There was no answer. I then asked again if anyone was out there, but all I got in response was dead silence. In fact, it seemed as if the only thing I heard was the howling wind and snowfall in the distance. I opened the door, but there was still nobody outside, and I didn't really expect to see anyone there. I put on my snow boots and walked out into the cold, looking for anyone who could be hiding anywhere. I checked behind my car, around the cabin, and even went as far as checking into the brush, but there was no sign of anyone. Finally, I walked back inside the cabin and closed the door. The very second I closed the door, the loud frantic knocking came back, and I yanked the door open only to see absolutely no one. I felt disturbed and locked the door, and I felt as if I were being watched by something in those woods. It was a very unsettling feeling, a sense of dread and concern. The next day, I packed up and left the cabin back to my apartment building. My grandparents have been up there ever since, but there was no signs of break-ins or anything like that. I don't want to describe my experience in full detail, because I know what happened. I just can't even begin to explain it. When I was 12, I lived in the country with both my parents somewhere in South Texas. We lived on somewhat of a ranch during this time, which was nice seeing as we had owned a lot of land and cattle. I was home alone one Saturday evening as my parents had gone out grocery shopping, leaving me to tend to the house. I was in my room trying to occupy myself by playing some video games on my computer when I heard my dad's voice call me from downstairs. "David." I figured that they must have been home, so I walked downstairs and yelled for my dad. But there was no answer, just complete silence. Eventually, I dismissed it as me hearing things and started heading back upstairs when I heard my dad call out for me again. "David?" This time, it seemed to be coming from outside of the house. I went out through the back door, calling for my dad, looking for him, when I noticed that his car wasn't even in the driveway. It was freaky as hell, but I eventually gave it up as a lost cause and continued my game. One more time, I began hearing the distinct voice of my dad call out to me from downstairs, and I knew I heard it this time. I called my dad on the phone and asked him if he was home, to which he replied no and that they were still at the store. I haven't told anyone else about this story, and half of me wants to believe that it might have been my imagination, but I was sure it was not. This story is told in the perspective of a female. When I was around 24, I had just graduated from college and I just bought my first house in Massachusetts with my fiancé. The house wasn't anything too special. It was just a simple house that was appropriate for 1 or 2 people. Anyway, my fiancé had a full-time job, so he would always be the one to take care of me when I was home. One night, my fiancé went to work as he had been called in for a possible storm emergency while I stayed home to look after our dog and finish unpacking. I had a mini dachshund named Buddy at the time. Big bark, small bite. Anyway, I'm heating up some food when I hear the dog barking by the stairs that led down into the basement. When I look down, I could see that our basement door was wide open. I didn't even dream of going down there, but his barking became more defensive, and I knew that something wasn't right. When I reached the bottom step, I tried looking around for anything he could have been barking at, when I hear a loud cackle from across the basement. I didn't dare shine my light in that direction. I simply walked back up the stairs and locked the basement door. I have yet to hear that cackle since, and me nor my fiance has found anyone down there.
Hey friends, thanks for watching the video. If you have any suggestions for the next video, I'd love to see them in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon and hit all notifications to get notified when I drop a new video or stream. And if you'd like to get early access to my videos before anyone else, please consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a channel member, where you get that and some other fun perks for just $1 a month. And I have my podcast now available with my past videos that can be found on all major podcast services. Also, I got some merch available now over on Spreadshirt. Make sure to go over there to pick up a Jensen t-shirt and show your love for the channel. All links to these and my social medias will be in the description field down below. And remember, get stinky.